Okay, our objective today is to be able to multiply fractions and mixed numbers. Okay, now when we have a fraction, we have the numerator part and the denominator part, and we want to multiply by another fraction. Okay, when you multiply fractions, you first look to see if you can divide out. Dividing out means you simplify before you multiply. Now, this first example, nothing's going to be able to divide out, so we're going to hold on to that idea of dividing out till we get an example where it works. All right. So if I multiply fractions, I want to multiply the numerator times the numerator. Right. 3 times 1 is 3. Denominator times denominator. 5 times 2 is 10. And I ask myself, what is the greatest common factor of the numerator and the denominator? Right. The greatest common factor of 3 and 10 is 1. So I know this fraction is in simplest form. Anytime we multiply fractions or divide fractions or add or subtract them for that matter, we want to always write our answers in simplest form, which means the greatest common factor of the numerator and the denominator has to be a 1. All right, let's take a look at our second example then. All right, I multiply numerator times numerator. 3 times 1 is going to be 3. Denominator times denominator. 5 times 4 is 20. I look to see if the fraction is in simplest form. The greatest common factor of 3 and 20 is a 1. So I know that 3/20ths is in simplest form. My last example, 2 times 5 is going to be 10. And 9 times 7 is 63. And once again, I ask myself, is that fraction in simplest form? Well, what's the greatest common factor of 10 and 63? Right, once again, that's going to be a 1. So 10/63 is a fraction in simplest form. So when you have a basic multiplication problem, you simply want to multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and then ask yourself, is the fraction in simplest form? Okay? Well, let's take a look at what it means to divide out. Right? So we go to example 4. And when I look at example 4, I can still multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, right? And if I do that, and let's do that quickly, 3 times 2 is 6, 8 times 5 is 40. And then you ask yourself, well, is the greatest common factor of 6 and 40 a 1? And the answer to that is no, right? Because 6 is an even number, 40 is an even number, so that has a greatest common factor of 2. So you want to use that greatest common factor to divide the numerator and the denominator. So if I take the greatest common factor 2, divide that into 6, that's going to give me 3. And I take half of 40, that's going to give me 20. And then the simplest form of 6/40ths would be 3/20ths. Now that's one way to do the problem, right? So you can multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and then simplify. But I'm going to erase that because I like for my students to simplify before they multiply. It's called dividing out. Now, what does that look like? Looks like this. I look at the numerator and then the opposite denominator and see if they have a common factor. Right? So I see 3 and 5. The only common factor they have is 1. So I can't divide out 3 and 5. But 2 and 8 have a common factor. Right? 2. So I use that common factor to simplify before I multiply. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And now I multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and I get my 3/20ths simplifying before I multiply. Now, why do I want to simplify before I multiply? Because your dividing out is going to give you easier division. If you multiply first and then try to simplify, you're going to be dealing with larger numbers. So it's easier to simplify before you multiply because you're going to be dealing with smaller numbers. All right, so we're just going to go ahead and practice, dividing out. So I look at my next example, and this is a nice example because I can divide out all over the place here. 3 and 3 I can divide out, right? I look opposite numerator and denominator. 3 and 3 have a common factor of 1. Of 3. So 3 divided by 3 is 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1. I use that common factor to simplify before I multiply. Then I look at 2 and 4. They also have a common factor of 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now I'm ready to multiply. 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times 2 is 2, right? And I get a product of 1/2. If I didn't simplify before I multiplied, I would have had 2 times 3, 6 for my numerator, 3 times 4, 12 is my denominator. And then I would have had to simplify that 6 over 12, and eventually I would have gotten down to 1/2 if I simplify correctly. But it's certainly easier to simplify before we multiply, okay? Our next example, I have 5/6 times 7/10. I can't divide out 6 and 7 because the greatest common factor of 6 and 7 is 1. So I can't divide out there. But 5 and 10 I can divide out because 5 and 10 have a common factor other than 1, right? We can divide each of those by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. Now we're ready to multiply. Numerator times numerator. 1 times 7 is 7. Denominator times denominator. 6 times 2 is 12. Right? And my fraction is going to be in simplest form. 7/12 because the greatest common factor of 7 and 12. That's going to be a 1. Okay? Well, what happens when I have to multiply by a whole number? Well, I put the whole number over a 1 first. And then I look to see if I can divide out. I can't divide out 3 and 1. I can't divide out 4 and 9. So I have to multiply. 3 times 9 is 27. 4 times 1 is 4. And I said in class, we can leave our fraction as 27 over 4 because it is a fraction in simplest form because the greatest common factor of 27 and 4 is 1. However, if it's a multiple choice item, you're not going to see an improper fraction as an answer. So we want to rewrite that improper fraction as a mixed number. So I divide 4 into 27. That goes 6 times because 6 times 4 is 24. That leaves 3 left over. That's my numerator. My denominator is a 4, right? So we're saying 27 over 4 is the same as 6 3/4. All right? We continue. I look at problem number 8, right? I put the whole number over a 1. I look to see if I can divide out. I can't divide out with this problem either. So I multiply numerator times numerator. 2 times 12 is 24. Denominator times denominator. 5 times 1 is 5. 24 over 5 is a fraction in simplest form because the greatest common factor of 24 and 5 is a 1. But I want to rewrite that as an improper fraction. As a mixed number. So I divide 5 into 24. 5 goes into 24 4 times with 4 left over. And I write that over my denominator of 5. So we're saying 4 and 4/5 is the same as 24 over 5. Okay? Next problem, 1/4 times 10. I'm going to put my whole number over a 1. Here I can divide out 4 and 10, right? Because 4 and 10 have a common factor other than 1. We can divide both 4 and 10 by 2. So 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. Now I can multiply numerator times numerator. 1 times 5 is 5. Denominator times denominator. 2 times 1 is 2. I want to rewrite that improper fraction as a mixed number by dividing. 2 goes into 5 2 times with 1 left over my denominator of 2. So 2 1/2 is the same as 5/2. Our next example, 5/7 times 14. I'm going to put that 14, the whole number, over 1. I look to see if I can divide out, right? And I can divide out 7 and 14 because they have a common factor of 7. So I divide 7 by 7, which is 1. 14 by 7, which is 2. Now I can multiply numerator times numerator. 5 times 2 is 10. Denominator times denominator. 1 times 1 is 1. Right? 10 over 1 is the same as 10. Right? So we can leave that as 10. And example number 11. Right? Why don't you guys try that? I'll pause for a second, see if you guys can divide that out correctly. Alright, so pause it. All right. Okay, let's try it. I can divide out 3 and 9 by 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 9 divided by 3 is 3. I can divide out 4 and 8 by 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. Now I multiply numerator times numerator. 1 times 1 is 1. Denominator times denominator. 2 times 3 is 6. Right? We get a product of 1/6. Okay. We did some examples where we were multiplying a whole number. All right, here we have a word problem, or a couple of word problems that are going to require us multiplying fraction by a whole number. You're decorating a bulletin board using a piece of green ribbon that's 5-6 yards long. You also need a yellow ribbon that's 9 times as long as the green ribbon. How much yellow ribbon do you need? All right, so we have 5, 6, but we have to multiply that by 9. All right, and I'm going to put that 9 over a 1. I look to see if I can divide out. I can divide out 6 and 9. They have a common factor of 3. So I divide. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 9 divided by 3 is 3. And then we multiply. Numerator times numerator. Denominator times denominator. I rewrite the improper fraction as a mixed number. 2 goes into 15 7 times with 1 left over. All right, we get 7.5 is the same as 15 over 2. Okay? A baby alligator is 5-6 foot long. An adult alligator is 12 times as long as the baby alligator. How long is the adult alligator? So we're going to take our fraction of 5-6. We have to multiply that by 12. I want to put the whole number over 1. Look to see if I can divide out anywhere. 5 and 1, I can't divide out because the greatest common factor of 5 and 1 is 1. But 6 and 12 we can divide out. They have a common factor of 6. I use that common factor to divide out. 6 divided by 6 is 1. 12 divided by 6 is 2. I multiply numerator times numerator. 5 times 2 is 10. Denominator times denominator. 1 times 1 is 1. Right? And I get 10. And that would be feet. Right? We should label our units as well. Okay. If we're estimating a product, you just want to round each to the nearest whole number. You know, if we're estimating a product here, so 1 1/4 to the nearest whole number would be 1. 2 3/4 to the nearest whole number would be 3. 1 times 3 is going to be 3. So if we're estimating products, just go to the nearest whole number. All right. If I look at each of these and I want to estimate, 5 5/6 to the nearest whole number is going to be 6 times 6 4/9 to the nearest whole number is going to be 6. 6 times 6 would be 36 if I'm estimating that product. All right. And the second example, 7 11/16 to the nearest whole number, that's going to be 8. 7 1/5 to the nearest whole number is going to be 7. 8 times 7 is going to be 56. Okay. We're going to finish up multiplying mixed number times a mixed number. If we look at our first example, it asks us to find the product of 2 2/3 times 3 1/4. Our first step, we want to write all mixed numbers as improper fractions. So I'm going to take 2 2/3, rewrite that as an improper fraction by multiplying the denominator of the fraction times the whole number, and then we add the numerator. 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8, and I keep the same denominator, 3, times 4 times 3 is 12, plus 1 is 13, and I keep the same denominator, 4. My next step, I look to see if I can divide out, and I can divide out 8 and 4 by dividing by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. I can't divide out 3 and 13 because 3 and 13, the greatest common factor is a 1. So now I go to my multiplication step. And I multiply numerator times numerator. 2 times 13 is 26. Denominator times denominator. 3 times 1 is 3. I rewrite the improper fraction as a mixed number. 3 goes into 26 8 times with 2 left over. And I write that with my denominator of 3. So 8 2/3 is the product of 2 2/3 times 3 1/4. Okay? Try a couple more here. 10 1/4 times 2 3/4. I rewrite each mixed number as an improper fraction. 4 times 10 is 40, plus 1 is 41. It's going to be over 4 times 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. That's going to be over 4. I look to see if I can divide out anywhere, and I can't divide out here. 41 and 4, the greatest common factor is a 1, so I can't divide out there. They have no other common factor other than 1. 4 and 11, I can't divide out there because they have no other common factor other than 1. So I have to go right to my multiplication step. Well, what's 41 times 11? Well, I use my distributive property and I make 11 10 plus 1. So 41 times 10 is 410. 41 times 1 is 41. So in my head I'm thinking 410 plus 41 should be 451. 4 times 4 is 16. And then 451 over 16 probably is a fraction in simplest form, but let's rewrite it as a mixed number. So I have to take 16, I have to divide 16 into 451. 16 times 2 is 32. I subtract, I get 3, I get 1, and I get 1. 16 into 131. Well, I know 16 times 10 is 160. So if I take 16 away from 160, that's going to be 44, which is still too large, so that's going to have to be an 8. 8 times 16, 8 times 6 is 48. 8 carry the 4. 8 times 1 is 8, and 4 is 12. Right, we have 3 left over. That remainder of 3, I put over my divisor of 16. So 28 and 3/16 is your product there. All right. If I want to do 7 1/3 times 3 3 3/4, I rewrite each mixed number as an improper fraction. 3 times 7 is 21, plus 1 is 22. That's over 3 times 4 times 3 is 12, and 3 is 15, and that's over 4. I look to see if I can divide out, and I can divide out everywhere here. 22 and 4 have a common factor of 2, so I divide. 22 divided by 2 is 11. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 3 and 15 have a common factor, 3. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 15 divided by 3 is 5. Now I can multiply numerator times numerator. 11 times 5 is 55. Denominator times denominator. 1 times 2 is 2. 55 over 2 I know is a fraction in simplest form, right? But I want to rewrite that as a mixed number. So I'm going to take my 2. I'm going to divide that into 55. 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract, I get 1. Bring down the 5. 2 times 7 is 14. Subtract, I get 1. And that remainder of 1, I put over my divisor of 2. I get 27 1/2 as the product of 7 1/3 times 3 3/4. All right, why don't you guys try these last 4 problems here, right, on your own. You can pause the video and then, I'll go ahead and do the problems, right, and then you can check your work. Okay, so let's try it. 1/3 times 1 1/6. It's going to be 1 over 3 times 6 times 1 is 6 plus 1 is 7 over 6. I can't divide out anywhere, so I multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, right? And 7/18 is a fraction in simplest form. 3 1/2. 2 times 3 is 6 plus 1 is 7 over 2 times 4 over 9. I can't divide out 7 and 9, but I can divide out 2 and 4. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 divided by 2 is 2. I multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. 14/9. I rewrite that as a mixed number. 9 goes into 14 one time with 5 left over 9. So 1 and 5/9 would be your product. 1 and 7/8 times 2 and 2/5. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 7 is 15. That's over 8 times 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12, and that's over 5. I look to see if I can divide out, and I can divide out everywhere. 8 and 12 have a common factor of 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. 15 and 5 have a common factor of 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 15 divided by 5 is 3. I multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator, and then I divide. 2 goes into 9 4 times with 1 left over. So 9.5 is the same, 9 halves is the same as 4 and a half. Alright, and this last one here. 5 times 7 is 35. 35 plus 5 is 40. That's going to give us 40 over 7 times 10 times 2 is 20 plus 1 is 21 over 10. Look at these numbers, real friendly. We could divide out everywhere. 40 and 10 have a common factor of 10. Right? 40 divided by 10 is 4. 10 divided by 10 is 1. 7 and 21 have a common factor of 7. 7 divided by 7 is 1. 21 divided by 7 is 3. I multiply. Numerator times numerator. 4 times 3 is 12. Denominator times denominator. 1 times 1 is 1. Right? And I get an answer of 12. Alright? We're going to finish up with a word problem here. Find the area of a rectangular air hockey table that measures 8¼ feet by 4 3/8 feet. We know when we find area is going to be equal to the length times the width, so we have to multiply these two mixed numbers together. So 8 1/4, I rewrite that as an improper fraction. 4 times 8 is 32, plus 1 is 33, that's going to be over 4, times 8 times 4 is 32, plus 3 is 35, that's going to be over 8. These are not friendly numbers. I can't divide out anywhere. Can't divide out 4 and 35 because the greatest common factor of 4 and 35 is 1. I can't divide out 33 and 8, right, because the greatest common factor of 33 and 8 is 1. So I actually have to multiply numerator times numerator, denominator times denominator. So on the side of my paper, I'm going to do 33 times 35. Right, multiply them together. 5 times 3 is 15. 5 carry the 1. 5 times 3 is 15 and 1 is 16. 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 3 is 9. We add. That's going to be 5. 6 and 9 is 15. Carry the 1. 1 and 1 is 2 and 9 is 11. So my numerator is 1,155. Thanks a lot, Mr. P. And my denominator, 4 times 8 is 32. I don't even want to think if that's a fraction in simplest form or not. So I'm going to do my long division to rewrite that improper fraction as a mixed number. So I'm going to take 32. It's my divisor. 1,155 is going to be my dividend. 32 goes into 115. That's going to be 3 times. 3 times 32 is 96. I want to subtract. Right, I'm going to change colors here so we can see the subtraction a little better. Can't subtract 6 from 5, so I borrow from the 1, rename it a 0. 5 becomes 15. That's a 9. 10 minus 9 is 1. I bring down the 5. 32 into 195. Well, I'm going to say 3 goes into 19 6 times. Right, I'll try that. 6 times 2 is 12. Put down the 2. Carry the 1. 6 times 3 is 18. Plus 1 is 19. Right? I'm going to subtract here. Right? That's supposed to be a 2. That's a little sloppy. 5 minus 2 is 3. My remainder of 3 I put over my divisor of 32. So I get 36 and 3/32 as my answer. Alright, not real pretty, right, but that's going to be our product there. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Alright, you guys show your work and do your best. Thanks.